So I'm going to read some more from the Greatest American Speeches, the stories and transcripts of the words that changed our history. So the next speech is from Sojourner Truth and the Entire Woman. Speech to the Women's Convention in Akron, Ohio, December 1851. So read the great part first. Born 1797 in Ulster County, New York State, the tall, gaunt figure of Sojourner Truth was an awesome sight on the podiums at religious, abolitionist, and suffrage conventions during the 1840s. Sojourner spoke with a heavy Dutch accent, but her natural eloquence and passion ensured that her message came across. Whether she actually delivered the speech with which she is most strongly identified is a matter of debate. However, her association with these words, as much as their powerful prose and imagery, has guaranteed their lasting power. Died 26th of November 1883 in Battle Creek, Michigan. In 1997, NASA's Mars Pathfinder robotic rover Sojourner was named after her. Sojourner Truth began life as Isabella Pomfrey, the daughter of slaves. She was a slave herself until the age of 30, and some of her own children were sold into slavery. Parted from her family at an early age, Isabella passed through the ownership of several slave masters, and between 1810 and 1827, she bore several children to a fellow slave, Thomas. In 1827, just before New York State finally abolished slavery, she fled to a farm owned by the Van Wagner family, who later freed her. She then successfully fought a legal battle to free her son Peter, who had been unlawfully sold to an Alabama planter. In 1829, Isabella took her two youngest children to New York City and supported her family with domestic work for 10 years. She came to believe that she was commanded by voices to take the name Sojourner Truth, to leave New York and to preach the message of God's goodness and the brotherhood of man. In 1843, she set out with only a bag of clothes and 20 cents. During her crusade, she sang, preached, and debated through the eastern states, at meetings, in churches, and on village streets. Sojourner dictated her autobiography, The Narrative of Sojourner Truth, as Northern slave to a neighbor, Oliver Gilbert, in 1846, and from then on lived on the proceeds of the sales of the book. During the 1850s, she drew large crowds with her dramatic lectures on slavery and suffrage. Although she was not the only ex-slave campaigning for the abolitionist cause during the 1840s and 1850s, she was unique in also speaking for women's rights. Matilda Jocelyn Gage, writing in the History of Women's Suffrage, gave a dramatic account of Sojourner's extempore speech and the Entire Woman at the Women's Convention in Akron, Ohio, in 1851. Although some argue that Sojourner Truth never actually spoke at the convention, however, she continued to appear at suffrage gatherings for the rest of her life. I'm going to keep reading it in whisper because someone just came back. During the Civil War, Sojourner carried supplies to African American volunteer soldiers in the Federal Army. In 1864, President Lincoln was still campaigning to encourage the migration of freed slaves to Kansas and Missouri and advocating an state. Harriet Beecher Stowe once wrote that Sojourner Truth had, more than any other woman she knew, the silent and subtle power that we call personal presence. So this is the start of the speech. Well, children, where there is so much racket, there must be something out of kilter. I think that twixt the men of the South and the women of the North, all talking about rights, the white men will be in a fix pretty soon. But what's all this here talking about? That man over there says that women need to be helped into carriages and lifted over ditches, and to have the best place everywhere. Nobody ever helps me into carriages, or over mud puddles, or gives me any best place. And ain't I a woman? Look at me, look at my arm. I have plowed, I have planted, and gathered into barns, and no man could head me. And ain't I a woman? I could work as much and eat as much as a man, when I could get it, and bear the lash as well. And ain't I a woman? I have borne 13 children, and seen most all sold off to slavery. And when I cried out with my mother's grief, none but Jesus heard me. And ain't I a woman? I have plowed and planted and gathered into barns, and no man could head me. And ain't I a woman? Then they talk about this thing in the head. What's this they call it? Member of audience, intellect. That's it, honey. What's that got to do with women's rights or N rights? If my cup won't hold but a pint and yours holds a quart, wouldn't you be mean not to let me have my little half measure full? Then that little man in the black there, he says women can't have as much rights as men, 'cause Christ wasn't a woman. Where does your Christ come from? Where did your Christ come from? From God and a woman. Man had nothing to do with him. In the first woman God ever made was strong enough to turn the world upside down all alone. These women together ought to be able to turn it back and get it right side up again. And now that they is asking to do it, the men better let them. Obliged to you for hearing me, and now old Sojourner ain't got nothing more to say. So the next speech is Frederick Douglass. What to the American slave is your 4th of July? Addressed to the citizens of Rochester, New York, 4th of July, 1852. Born February 1818 in Maryland to mark Independence Day in July 1852, Frederick Douglass was invited to make a speech by local dignitaries in his hometown of Rochester, New York. He delivered a passionate invective against the hypocrisy of celebrating the principle of liberty, while so many black Americans were still not free to enjoy it. Died 20th of February 1895 in Washington, D.C. Frederick Douglass is one of 21 exceptional Americans celebrated in the Extra Mile Points of Light volunteer pathway in Washington. Frederick Douglass was born Frederick Bailey. His mother was a slave, but the identity of his white father is unknown. When he was 8, he was sent to the household of Hugh Auld in Baltimore. Auld's wife taught him to read, but Hugh put a stop to Frederick's education, arguing that if a slave learned to read, he would become dissatisfied with his lot and seek freedom. Douglass continued to educate himself secretly. When he was 15, he was rented out to a local farmer, Edward Covey, a vicious slave breaker. Douglass was nearly crushed psychologically by Covey's beatings, but finally fought back, defending himself so effectively that Covey never beat him again. At 16, Douglass was apprenticed in a shipyard and began to plan his escape. In 1837, he met Anna Murray, whom he later married, a freed African-American who helped him flee to Massachusetts, disguised as a seaman. worked as a laborer there for 3 years, evading slave hunters by changing his name to Douglas. He attended abolitionist meetings in 1841, made his first speech at an anti-slavery convention in Nantucket. Douglas was so articulate and persuasive that he was hired as an agent by the Massachusetts Anti-Slavery Society and sent on a 6-month countrywide tour. In 1845, Douglas published his autobiography, Narrative of the Life of Frederick Douglass, an American slave. It was an instant bestseller, although some doubted his authenticity, claiming that the author was too well educated to have been a slave. The huge publicity had a negative aspect. Friends pointed out that it would attract the attention of Hugh Auld, whose property Douglas remained, and persuaded Douglas to leave on a protracted tour of Britain. In 2 years, Douglas earned enough to purchase his freedom, and on returning to New York to start his own newspaper, the North Star, this became a target for anti-abolitionists. On one occasion, a group of men tried to smash the printing press. Douglas preempted them by striking the first blow, saying, "You can smash the machines, but you can't smash ideas." During the Civil War and the period of Reconstruction that followed, Douglas advocated a gradual approach to abolition and argued that the Constitution could and should be used in the fight against slavery. These views brought him into conflict with abolitionists like William Garrison, who believed that the Constitution was inherently pro-slavery. Douglas supported the women's rights movement and was one of the signatories of the Declaration of Sentiments that launched in 1848. On the death of his first wife, he married the feminist Helen Pitts, a white woman 20 years his junior. The marriage caused public controversy, but the couple were supported by Elizabeth Cady Stanton. In his later years, Douglas held several government posts, including U.S. Minister to Haiti. He died in Washington in 1895. His home, Cedar Hill, is now the Frederick Douglass National Historic Site. So now's the speech. Fellow citizens, pardon me and allow me to ask, why am I called to speak here today? What have I or those I represent to do with your national independence? Are the great principles of political freedom and natural justice embodied in that Declaration of Independence extended to us? And am I therefore called upon to bring our humble offering to the national altar and to confess the benefits and express devout gratitude for the blessings resulting from your independence to us? Do you mean, citizens, to mock me by asking me to speak today? Would to God, both for your sakes and ours, that an affirmative answer would be truthfully returned to these questions. But such is not the state of the case. I say it with a sad sense of disparity between us. I am not included within the pale of this glorious anniversary. Your high independence only reveals the immeasurable distance between us. The blessings in which you this day rejoice are not enjoyed in common. The rich inheritance of justice, liberty, prosperity, and independence bequeathed by your fathers is shared by you, not by me. The sunlight that brought life and healing to you has brought stripes and death to me. This 4th of July is yours, not mine. You may rejoice, I must mourn. To drag a man in fetters into the grand illuminated temple of liberty and call upon him to join you in joyous anthems were inhuman mockery and sacrilegious irony. Do you mean, citizens, to mock me by asking me to speak today? If so, there is a parallel to your conduct, and let me warn you that it is dangerous to copy the example of a nation whose crimes towering up to heaven were thrown down by the breath of the Almighty, burying that nation in irrecoverable ruin. At a time like this, scorching irony, not convincing argument, is needed. Oh, had I the ability, and could I reach the nation's ear, I would today pour out a fiery stream of biting ridicule, blasting reproach, withering sarcasm, and stern rebuke. For it is not light that is needed, but fire. It is not the gentle shower, but thunder. We need the storm, the whirlwind, and the earthquake. The feeling of the nation must be quickened. The conscience of the nation must be roused. The propriety of the nation must be startled. The hypocrisy of the nation must be exposed, and its crimes against God and man must be denounced. For revolting barbarity and shameless hypocrisy, America reigns without a rival. What to the American slave is your 4th of July? I answer, a day that reveals to him more than all the other days of the year the gross injustice and cruelty to which he is the constant victim. To him your celebration is a sham, your boasted liberty an unholy license, your national greatness swelling vanity. Your sounds of rejoicing are empty and heartless, your denunciation of tyrants brass-fronted impudence, your shouts of liberty and equality hollow mockery, your prayers and hymns, your sermons and thanksgivings, with all your religious parade and solemnity, are to him the bombast, fraud, deception, impiety, and hypocrisy's thin veil to cover up crimes which would disgrace a nation of savages. There is not a nation of the earth guilty of practices more shocking and bloody than are the people of these United States at this very hour. Go where you may, search where you will, roam through all the monarchies and despotisms of the old world, travel through South America, search out every abuse, and when you have found the last, lay your facts by the side of the everyday practices of this nation, and you will say with me that for revolting barbarity and shameless hypocrisy, America reigns without a rival. So, those 2 speeches from this book. I think I'll leave it at that and carry on in another video with essays.